Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome from Scott. Smart Community Tourism webinar series. We are with you today with volume 28, and we are going to invite our curator, the architect of Scott webinars, Professor Jafar Jafari, to enlighten us with opening remark, and I'll be back to you shortly after Professor Jafari's opening remark to introduce our moderator and the program for today. Professor Jafari, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and good day to everybody. Thanks very much for joining the webinar. Those of you have been with us before on different volumes, different episodes. You know that at the beginning, either I or Kazim or Duarte or other colleague would tell you about the series in general, the purpose of the series. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now. The subject of the webinar is something that Mozo is going to handle. We decided to start this series because very limited attention was given to small communities in tourism. Very little attention was given to small operators or small and medium-sized operators. And especially this became more evident during the COVID-19. The big companies, the big destinations, the big airlines, the big hotel chains, they knew where to go for help. They knew how to scream. They knew how to get attention. The little ones didn't know where to go, what to do, what questions to ask, from whom to ask the question, what to do in the meantime. So we decided to respond to the forgotten voices and faces, or they are not very much present on the scene as you have already experienced. If you review the webinars you have attended yourself so far, it is always about the big issues in tourism, including over-tourism, popular destinations, etc., etc. So we do little things for little companies, and hopefully that goes a few extra miles. The topic of today is excellent as something that it should be in the core of any subject. I thank Mozo for popularizing, Mozo and a few other colleagues for popularizing and populating the tourism field with this subject. The book that they did some 5 years ago, I believe, was one of the milestones in the field of tourism, bringing quality of life and associating that with quality of life for the community as well as for the host. And I'm pretty sure today we will be talking about quality of life, both for host and guest. And this is very important. Those of you have seen some of my past presentations. I came up with a slogan about 10 years ago. It has gone worldwide yet. A nice place to visit is a nice place to live, or vice versa. A nice place to live is a nice place to visit. And I try to associate these two together. I cannot think of any destination that people are miserable and tourism is blooming. It can't happen. You know, one would hurt the other one. And the purpose of tourism is, after all, to help the communities, whether it's small or large. And of course, we are dealing with the small communities. I don't want to say more because I'm here also, Mozo, to listen to you and to your panel with experts in this subject. It's a very exciting topic. Thank you very much for posing this topic. And thank you very much for your panel. And the microphone is yours, Mozo.
Thank you, Jafar, for your great remarks. And as Jafar said, I am Muzo Isal, Professor and Chair of the Department of Hospitality and Tourism Management, Heisenberg School of Management at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. And it is really wonderful to know that you are joining us from different parts of the world. Wherever you might be, I would say good morning to those of us who are in the USA, those of you who are in Europe, good afternoon, and some other places, and good evening to you all. And we're delighted that you could join us. As Kazim and Jafar mentioned, the focus of this panel is part of Scott's Smart Community Tourism webinars. is quality of life, well-being of the host community. And this is an area of research that has gained much attention. So first, let me take this moment to thank again the creator of the Smart Community Tourism webinar series, Professor Jafar Jafari. This is a fantastic service that's been going on for a while, and also the creator, Professor Kazim Rohadare, for giving us the opportunity to organize this and moderate this panel. And also your admin, Harad, I guess we thank her as well. So over the past 20 years or so, we have seen much more research being conducted in tourism and quality of life. And this area of research has blossomed, growing over the years to the point that it is now well recognized to be an important subject matter in tourism hospitality discipline. So the scope and range of issues suggest that the topic of well-being, life satisfaction, quality of life research in tourism hospitality is multidimensional, highly complex, and poses challenges and new opportunities for academics and practitioners at all levels, whether it be you're talking about at the individual level, community level, or as a destination. So this panel that we organized today is created to explore the nature of the reciprocal link between tourism development and quality of life, and hopefully offer some practical solutions that Jafar alluded to for communities as destinations, and maybe some guidelines and perhaps future directions for communities as destinations that may be seeking to further develop their tourism potential to either maintain their market share or sustain their tourism activities without, this is important, impinging on the well-being of different stakeholders within that community. This is so important. Within this reality, we as researchers and practitioners are also challenged to continue engaging in meaningful research, examining some aspect of well-being and quality of life research. Just like in information technology, as Jafar alluded to, quality of life research also cut across almost everything we do. As you know, we have probably looked at the website. We have 4 outstanding panelists. And I'm so happy that they all agreed to be part of this panel. And these people are extremely busy and their time is very precious. Professor Joe Sirgy, Professor Gibson, Professor Cross, and Professor Kruger. I thank them all for being with us on this panel. I am sure these panelists will be happy to hear from you after our, I guess, discussion and dialogue. If you were to reach out to any of these panelists, they will be delighted to get back to you, because it looks like we have so many participants from different parts of the world. We hope that the panel will inspire us and maybe help us to engage in this line of research from your own area of expertise. The scope and range of possible topics is enormous in this field. That being said, now you have probably looked at their bios and who these individuals are. I don't think they really need specific introduction, but let's start the panel discussion, I guess. At least let me tell you a little bit about the structure. First, we'd like our panelists just maybe give us, share with us like 5-6 minutes of their time to focus on the things that they like to share with us, because they all have different expertise within this quality of life research. So we would love to start off with Professor Joe Sirgy, who's been probably one of the well-established, well-known thinker, leader, researcher in the area of quality of life worldwide. I mean, the words that I could have come up would not be sufficient to express or to explain his contribution, and he's the kind of person who could be so contagious. He's the one who got me into this quality of life research at Virginia Tech when I was there. But it is a great pleasure, Joe, to have you here, and I'm humbled and honored this goes to you all to really have you as members of this panel. And then I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Joe, and then take maybe 5-7 minutes or so. Then Joe will be followed by Heather Gibson, Professor Gibson, then Professor Tycho Kroos, and finally Professor Stefan Kruger. Would that sound good to us now, rather than just spending a lot of time on bios? But I think you will be able to read all that, but these are just fantastic people to be part of. Joe, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Muzo, for this introduction, and hello, everyone. As you can see from this slide, I was asked to sort of set the stage by focusing on discussing the quality of life theory or the psychology of well-being in the context of community quality of life, especially in the context of travel and tourism. So again, we're focusing on host communities and the extent to which residents within a host community can or are likely to experience a high level of well-being as a function of tourism development within that community. So the theory that seems to dominate this kind of research over the years is called bottom-up spillover theory of life satisfaction, as you can see from this slide. And the slide—
Joseph, would you share the slide, please?
Oh, I thought okay, I'm sorry. Some reason I thought it was already up and running.
Perfect.
Okay, as you can see from this slide, the theory that has sort of dominated the research in this area in travel and tourism is called bottom-up spillover theory of life satisfaction. And this figure shows the sort of the psychology behind it. And the psychology behind it, much of the research has sort of focused on life satisfaction. And in this context, we're talking about life satisfaction of residents of host communities, people that live in the community, and the extent to which they feel satisfied with their lives. And ultimately, what we want to do is we want to connect the kinds of experiences associated with travel and tourism in the context of that community and the extent to which it feeds to life satisfaction. So as you see from this pyramid, life satisfaction is very much influenced by satisfaction in life domains. So when we talk about life domains, we're talking about things like, if I were to ask you, how do you feel about your social life? How do you feel about your work life? How do you feel about your community life? How do you feel about your leisure life? These are different life domains that are sort of embedded and segmented within the minds of community residents. And the satisfaction that is sort of invested in those different life domains influence, the life satisfaction judgment. The life satisfaction judgment is, if I were to ask a person, how do you feel about your life at large, as a whole? So people, what they do is, psychologically speaking, is they focus on how they feel in the context of specific life domains, social life, family life, work life, leisure life, community life. And what they do is, the life satisfaction judgment is very much influenced by the positive and negative feelings that they have or sort of invested in those different life domains. So as you can see from this figure, satisfaction with life domains influences life satisfaction at large. So the challenge then, in the context of a community and residents that reside that live in the host community is how do experiences related to travel and tourism within that community affects satisfaction with life domains. So let's say if a person lives in a community that has some sort of an attraction, whatever the attraction is, let's say maybe a water park. Okay, well, the extent to which the water park influences his or her satisfaction in, let's say, maybe leisure domain, in social life, in family life, it's very likely that, again, such an attraction in the host community is likely to kind of spill over and generate positive or negative feelings, depending on exactly how things go about. And these affective experiences related to specific life events in the context of the host community spills over into these life domains, ultimately affecting how people feel satisfied with their lives at large. So this is the sort of the gist of the theory that has sort of dominated this kind of research. These are two references that can, for those people who are interested in reading a little bit more about it, then you may be able to, again, do a little bit more reading about this. But in essence, what we're looking at, how does tourism in a community influence community residents' quality of life? This is another figure that really shows you how it does that. And this is, again, based on the research that we've conducted. Actually, Muzo and I have done this together, again, with other people. So the idea then is life satisfaction is very much influenced by the sense of material well-being, social well-being, the sense of cultural well-being, and the sense of environmental well-being, again, embedded in that in the context of that community, and the perception, how they perceive tourism economic impact and tourism social impact, tourism cultural impact, tourism environmental impact. These things, these perceptions affect their sense of material well-being, it's their social well-being, their cultural well-being, their environmental well-being. And this influence of what's happening in the community and the way it affects those specific life domains is very much moderated by what we call tourism development cycle. And the tourism development cycle is whether, again, those attraction sites or whatever the tourism types of services that are provided within this community tend to be new or tend to be well established. So we're talking about a development cycle. So this is the sort of the model that has dominated the research in that area. And if you can sort of understand or appreciate this model and the research behind it, you'd be able to, again, better appreciate, what we're talking about in terms of the extent to which residents can feel satisfied with their lives as a function of what's happening with travel and tourism embedded in that community, or at least contextualized as such. Okay, well, on that note, I'm going to turn it over back to Muzo because I think, that is the theoretical base of which we can understand how tourism affects quality of life for residents in a community setting. Muzo?
Thank you, Joe. Just before we move on to the second panelist, there has been some confusion in terms of different terms that people use in this line of research. What do we mean, for example, when we say psychological happiness, like hedonic versus, let's say, we talk about, let's say, prudential happiness, life satisfaction, even eudaimonic, whatever, satisfaction. So, without getting into too much detail, could you just shed some light on all this in terms of like philosophical foundation of this concept, and what do they represent, or how do they overlap in general?
Okay, sure, and a good question, and that may help the audience better understand exactly what we've been doing in terms of quality of life and the psychology of well-being. So in the psychology of well-being, much of the research has sort of distinguished three major concepts associated with the concept of well-being. So again, if we're talking about the well-being of community residents, in that sense, life satisfaction seems to be a major concept. So when we ask, how do you feel about your life at large? Then that is a major concept of what we call the psychology of well-being. The other one is what we call, what Muzo has made reference to, and that is hedonic well-being. And that is a little bit more a concept which is sort of at a micro level. It's much more can be construed at an emotional level. And in that context, we talk about a preponderance of positive versus negative affect or negative feelings. So a person who's experienced something within the community related to travel and tourism, as a resident, if that person feels a preponderance of positive feelings, positive emotions, vis-a-vis negative emotions, then we can say that that person has been the tourism component has influenced the quality of life or the well-being of that person in a positive way. If there is more positive emotions than negative emotion as a function of those travel and tourism experiences that are embedded in that community. The third concept is a little bit more a macro level concept, a developmental type of concept, which is based on what we call eudaimonia. It's sort of a Greek term that really goes back all the way to the times of Aristotle, the Greek philosopher. And it deals with not only happiness, it doesn't deal with just positive and negative emotions. It focuses on the good life. So a person who's experiencing the good life is a person who is satisfied with his life, is a person who experiences a preponderance of positive emotions vis-a-vis negative emotions, but also is a little bit more psychologically developed, socially developed, emotionally developed, and morally developed. So we're talking about a good person. So much of the quality of life research, at least the psychology part of it, tends to focus nowadays on not just happiness per se, but how does travel and tourism contributes to a eudaimonic type of experience, a well-being type of experience that helps the person develop psychologically, emotionally, socially, morally, that kind of thing. So again, these are three major concepts that have now has sort of dominated the academic literature on the psychology of well-being.
Thank you, Joe. I'm sure later on our audience will have some question on this, but just to mention, Joe, of course, has over 30 books in this area, and if you want to know some of this in detail, and I'm not promoting his latest book or edition, but there is that book, The Psychology of Quality of Life. I think now just came out the updated new version of it. That's a leading book in this area, and you're welcome to take a look at it. Published by Springer. Thank you, Joe. This is wonderful. Well, I'll at this time, I guess, looking at our program, Kazim, is there anything else you suggest us to do, or are we taking a little break, then we come back to this discussion Q&A session?
Thank you, Muzo, Professor Uysal, as it was expected from you. Very punctual and very informative panel. I'm just taking a lot of memo myself, and we have a lot of questions in the panel. Before that, I just want to mention that Dr. Uysal has an extensive experience in tourism and hospitality field. He has worked on several funded projects and conducted workshops and seminars in several countries. He is a recipient of several research and teaching awards and member of the International Academy for the Study of Tourism, the Academy of Leisure Science, and the Hospitality and Tourism Management Academy. His current research interests focus on development and quality of life research in tourism and hospitality setting. Thanks, Muzo. If you agree, we go with a cultural break, as it is the custom of a Scot. While our audience can grab their coffee and they move their body a bit, we come back with the panel discussion. Thank you very much, and welcome back again. I hope everybody had a bit of time to refresh. I just grabbed my coffee. I don't know what time is in your local, and we are ready to go with the question and answer. Before that, I want to mention that we in Scott team receive emails from you guys about the videos and recording of this webinars. All are ready in about 12 hours after the webinar and accessible from our YouTube channel. I would like to ask our admin people to send the link, please, to the chat. Yes, you can see the YouTube channel in the chat. Maybe it's better if you just click on that and subscribe the channel, and automatically when the videos are uploaded to the channel, it comes with a notification to you, and you have the answer to the question that you ask us. Thank you very much. So I would like to ask Professor Uysal to direct the panel discussion. We have some questions in the chat, and some of them are directed to our speakers directly. Professor Uysal, the panel is yours.
Thank you, Kazim. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I did again. Looking at the chat and some of the questions posed by our great panelists, maybe I have like 4 or 5 questions. I don't know who I should direct these questions to, but I think maybe one of the questions we can focus on is that clarification between, let's say, subjective versus objective quality of life indicators. So this is a measurement issue, and are they distinct? Maybe this is for Joe, or do they overlap somehow? And then I know Tuko spent quality time on that little bit in his research, and maybe Joe, you can just take this question, and then Tuko maybe weigh in on this. So what are we talking about here when we say objective versus subjective quality of life indicators or measures? I think within the context of maybe just community development and community tourism.
Right, and definitely Tico can weigh in on this, given his research on with the Human Development Index. So a good way to actually look at objective indicators of quality of life in the context of a community or a state or a nation is to focus on what we call objective indicators as captured by the United Nations Development Program Human Development Index, based on what Tico was talking about as the capability approach by Professor Emeritus Sen. And this particular approach, objective indicators of quality of life as captured by the Human Development Index, is broken down by education. You got education as indicator. So the idea is that quality of life of people in a community would be high if the education level is high. And a measure of education would be something like the extent to which most of the people within that community have achieved a certain level of educational attainment. Like, you know, the more educated, the higher the quality of life. Another one would be economics. And in terms of the economic well-being, typically, at least from if you're doing it at the country level, it's usually something to do with the gross national product. But at the community level, you can talk about household income. So those people who have, if the majority of the people in the community have a higher level of economic well-being, that means they have more income.
Health.
Yeah. Huh? Say it
Health.
again? Health, yeah.
Health.
That's, you know, I almost lost it for a second. At the national level, we usually talk about health as in terms of life expectancy, captured again by the Human Development Index, but at least at the community level, you can talk about, for example, absence of disease or disease incidence. You can capture that at the community level. So these are objective indicators of community quality of life, and which would be very different from subjective indicators. The subjective indicators would be, as we mentioned, it's based on the psychology of well-being, as in life satisfaction, as in positive affect or positive feelings or emotions. And as we talked about in terms of psychological well-being and psychological well-being as captured in terms of what we call eudaimonic well-being. So there should be overlap between objective indicators of quality of life and subjective indicators of quality of life, but not necessarily so. There's so many mediators, so many moderators that kind of, you know, help us understand the relationship or the link between subjective and objective indicators of quality of life. And this is a topic that can be very complex, and and there's no way we'd be able to get into it in at least in the context of this panel. But if you're interested, contact, you know, send me an email message and I can send you a bunch of references related to that topic.
Muzo, I just want to add to what Professor Sirgy mentioned is in the public policy area. If you have, I mean, if you only look at the subjective well-being, and for example, if I take Paraguay as an example, where it's the happiest country in the world, while objectively they are the second poorest in Latin America, a pervert politician or legislator would say, well, you guys are saying you're happy. Why should I care to provide you with hospitals, better schools, et cetera, et cetera? So that's why it's so important to look at how close these two are together. and try to find out why there is a disconnect, or in order to, to come up with the policies that you would need in order to, really help people in their objective, in their living conditions as well, which is very, very important. I cannot hear you. I cannot.
Just to add to this discussion, I also said something about this again in the chat. I was thinking about having some sort of a threshold. Is it possible for us to, Stefan talk about, slow tourism, at what point, we as community make a decision, let's say, not to grow, or just say, is there a threshold thereafter, we're going to see some sort of deterioration of quality of life locals, so that, it's a capacity issue, right, Heather, as you were referring to, and how do you measure that? Is 10,000 enough to maintain that level of quality of life as set or desired by locals, or should we just go with 20,000, right? There is that issue of threshold, and Bassos made a good point. He said, I'm going to read his question. Question to all panelists. In a setting where tourism functions as community quality enhancer, what would be the first signs pointing to a deterioration of this? So I guess he implies that there has to be some threshold of development. And we've seen so many different places in the USA all over, right? So you go in and go out and you just like, you don't really just a place that has lost its local identity, right? And sense of place, etc. Just a highly commodified product, right? In and out type. And then, yes, I've been there, but locals, and Jafari will speak to it too well, really are irritated to the extent that they don't want to see any more visitors in June. Like you look at a place like Hilton Head Island, right? Or Myrtle Beach in South Carolina, you have limited access to it, and locals are not as happy with the people who come in. I know this from Venice, talking to some of our colleagues, and locals who have probably moved out long time ago, living on the second floor as these beautiful gift shops, are not as happy with those people day and night. And there are some local restrictions as to how late they can open, right? So that you cut down noise. So the point is there a threshold that we can maintain, meaning maintaining our level of quality of life as we define? You look at the slow tourism concept, right? That is based on that premise, that locals should have saying in that development process. A good example is you look at Bellinzona in Switzerland, right? The capital of Ticino canton. That's how they manage their influx of visitors to some extent, or level of development, so that they can maintain their quality of life, however they may define that based on objective or subjective indicators. But I'm just throwing this out, maybe even including our distinguished scholar, Professor Jafari, if you may want to just weigh in on this as well. Like, that threshold issue is a big issue, capacity issue. How do you maintain that psychologically, physically, and socially? So can you hear me?
No, the microphone wasn't coming on. Yes, I did. Thank you very much. There are many ways of looking at this, and today we were sometimes talking about individual. Well, let me first say the keywords we have been using: quality of life, and it was mentioned a number of times. Happiness, satisfaction, and well-being. These are the keywords we use today every time. But sometimes I think we were zigzagging between individual happiness, satisfaction, quality of life, and community, group. That is very important to acknowledge. I don't want to talk to any panelists as such, refer to any comments of the panelists. So let me go to something neutral, which is the video. The video was talking about individual happiness. Do what you wish. Enjoy what you like. But wait, if what I do and I like, when I do it, my community doesn't like that, now what's going to do? So we have to make this huge distinction between individual happiness and community happiness. let's connect this to the reality of today, COVID-19. My neighbors, and there are many of them, they would be very happy not to wear the mask and go outside. And then there are those who would be disturbed. So how do we measure this, just this little factor? How do we measure happiness here? What do we do? Going to tourism, there are communities, members who don't like tourism, and those who love to have tourism. So again, we have this situation going on. So I wanted to make this point, plus the fact, I want to add the point that the models that we talk about are often Western models of happiness, measurement of happiness, well-being, etc., etc. Just for the sake of argument, in Western sense, maybe happiness is something external. We show it, we reveal it. In many developing countries, people don't reveal it. Happiness is internal, it's personal. So how do we bring these issues to the concept of happiness, individual, community, culture, developing countries, different cultures? I mean, I was listening to all of you, and the word culture was not even mentioned once, while community is defined by culture. So these are the points I wanted to add, and I hope my colleagues would like to comment on that.
One thing that is so important, the context in which we do our research has to be understood and well understood, because that's what this is all about to me, because not every place will be the same, and there's a high degree of heterogeneity, and then we need to take that into account so that we can make appropriate implications. Speaking of some of these methodological issues, I was also thinking about another area in terms of like generating our data for this type of research. I guess Tuco maybe may have done some survey, or mostly use maybe time series or longitudinal data. Some of the things we see mostly rely on cross-sectional data that is generated at one point in time. We don't really get into longitudinal studies, even if I see in the chat a lot of other colleagues in different countries in Spain, Portugal, Europe, and OECD, I mean, they monitor some of this, right? They seem to do good surveys at the local level, regional or state level. But the issue is how do you go about generating appropriate data for your research or topic of interest, right? But as I said, we lack maybe longitudinal studies, but mostly rely on, let's say, already collected, data sources, secondary over time, which is good, maybe to use to do some sort of based on objective quality of life indicators, because relying on secondary data, more quantifiable, measurable, that will be available to us. But once you get into subjective issues, even if there is some overlap, you can ask people, okay, how do they perceive this tangibilized aspect of quality of life indicators? That's one thing, but the reality, right, having that food on the table is a different measure, which is much easier. So the question to me is like, when we do our research, right, I was trying to figure out if there is any overlap between subjective, objective measures in the same research setting. Okay, that's one. Or should we also try to do longitudinal studies over time to monitor like change, so that we can understand how locals may respond to these physical changes to the structure of that destination over time, meaning their behavioral responses to it. So I think that kind of monitoring is extremely important. If you could, any of you speak to this, let's say like longitudinal type work or just secondary data sources using time series to understand, let's say, quality of life indicators, etc.
Well, I can, I think, address something. I mean, these are very interesting points and definitely thought-provoking. The whole idea of culture, the whole idea of carrying capacity, bringing in models from sociology, from ecology to capture those. But going back to Muzo's idea of longitudinal research, I think much of that can be captured at the psychological level. And let's say, for example, if we're talking about how residents perceive the impact of tourism in different life domains, and if you'd be able to conduct a longitudinal survey to essentially capture those perceptions in the context of cultural life, in the context of social life, family life, leisure life, and so forth, economic life or financial well-being. And if you'd be able to do that, then, and you do this over time, you'd be able to see how these perceptions have changed in the context of a given community. And by doing so, you'd be able to figure out exactly whether you have exceeded a certain threshold, maybe in economic well-being in the context of social well-being, and once you be able to identify that threshold in the context of the residents' perceptions, in the context of those different social domains, the public policy implications are pretty obvious at that point, because if we're talking about environmental degradation, and if most of the residents would be able to see that and feel pretty bad about it, then the public policy implication in relation to the environmental infrastructure would be very evident. You need to do something about it, and therefore you'd be able to develop some very specific policies in relation to those different issues. So from a psychological point of view, you'd be able to capture much of that and translate these longitudinal findings into concrete public policies.
Maybe at this time, I see a lot of specific questions, and maybe I can pick one of them. And then Dory made the point that, maybe this goes back to Joe, like going through longitudinal studies may, contradict, let's say, your regular research productivity, because it takes a lot of time, and yet we're under pressure maybe in academia to publish, produce, and that is true but as a research unit, I think you can maintain some sort of visibility by creating that kind of knowledge coming out of it consistently over time. That gives you much longer, better visibility for the institution than maybe you will get individually. So the question would be, like longitudinal versus cross-sectional, or just quick, doesn't take a lot of time, so you can get something out in publication. Is that a valid argument or not? But I just mentioned because someone brought that up in the chat. Joe, what do you think? What is the trade-off, I guess, as a researcher, right? Someone who is a PhD or just, ready to go out and initiate something longitudinal, and yet the pressure is something else, in academia.
Yeah.
Then I will turn it to Kazim. Maybe we will just see what else we have in the chat to continue with our discussion. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. Our job as academics is to be able to produce the kinds of models, theoretical models, and validate those models based on good research, setting the foundation for practitioners to be able to use those models in a way that would ultimately create an impact. So, as academics, I don't think we can do it on our own. We have to team up with practitioners we're talking about longitudinal research in every community. If let's say the model that I was talking about, and that's also partly Muzo's model too, is based on capturing residents' perceptions of tourism development in these different life domains, then the practitioners can take this model and take the measures that are embedded in this model and apply it to their community and monitor the level of quality of life in those, in relation to those specific life domains, and be able to translate the findings, the study findings, in terms of something very tangible in terms of public policies, or as Jafar is talking about in terms of managerial policies related to the hospitality industry. We need to team up with the practitioners. We can't do it at all. And the practitioners need to team up with the academics that do this kind of research so that they would be able to do it in a credible and valid way.
Thank you, Joe. Great. Hopefully it will help our colleagues and friends. And there's a lot of question about the measurement issues, but let's just turn the panel back to Kazim. And so would you like to zero in on specific questions, Kazim, in our chat so that our panel could respond
Thank you.
to?
Yes, thank you, Muzo. I'm learning a lot, and I there are a lot of questions directly to me. And if I summarize some of them and I add some to this, and if I can add some this question in this way, a lot of questions goes to the presentation by Tico and Joseph. You mentioned about economic, socio-cultural, and environmental capitals, let's say, or resources, and in the other hand, the sense of material well-being on social and cultural or environmental well-being. So one issue is how we can measure the change of people's satisfaction or their point of view toward these sense of well-being. For example, culture is changing, social capital is changing, environmental resources or the quality of environmental resources. So how we can trace this or measure it over the time? Maybe something that were satisfying people a decade before is not, or the values change and so on. And as Tico mentioned, poor are happy, and some maybe developed countries with more wealth, they're unhappy. So can you elaborate some on the time perspectives of satisfaction?
Tico, you want to go first?
On a time series perspective, also panel perspective, we have done, we took the time dimension into consideration for especially objective, when we looked at objective well-being using Human Development Index and also Human Development Index Plus. And of course, you see that it changes over time, and the relationship between tourism development and well-being changes. As we said, there are thresholds, and we can measure that threshold exactly, for example, by looking at the amount of income per capita, at what level does it change, for example, in order to get an idea. And then we can, in some studies, we have gone to quintiles to look at within a country itself. So not only between countries, but also within. The other thing is the only study that we did from a subjective well-being is in the case of Aruba, where we have looked at 2011, 2015, 2017, having the same type of questions and looking at, not the same people, but using a representative sample. We are waiting right now because of COVID to see how that impacts, and I think we will do something next year in order to see that evolvement over time. But what we have seen clearly pre-COVID over these three subjective, with three surveys actually, we have seen that the relationship between tourism development and well-being has disappeared completely, because it does not exist between the two. But what is very, very important is it starts, so the direct relationship. The indirect is going very much towards the word opportunities and also social comparison, especially, again, the question of inequality. That is what is becoming stronger, and that affects how people perceive tourism. Because if you look at the four dimensions that Professor Sirgy mentioned, they're of course, they have different weight and they cancel each other out. So that's also very important to look at. So I may say that I'm very much against the way tourism is developing from a social or environmental perspective. But if I weigh the material perspective stronger, that cancel out the other two and still have a positive impact on how I see well-being in general, about my well-being. So these things, we are getting a better sense of what's going on internally when we look at these different domains.
Okay, well said. Let me go back to this. This is, again, a slide that I showed. And as I mentioned, that this model has been validated. So we know that this model works because we've got much data that substantiates this model. Now, what Kazim was saying is that we need to measure the sense of material well-being and the sense of social well-being and cultural well-being, environmental well-being in the context of community. No, you don't need to do that. This model is already validated. The only thing that you need to do in the context of a given community, the hospitality and the tourism industry operators have to measure continuously these constructs right on the left-hand side of the model. Perceived tourism economic impact, perceived tourism social impact, perceived tourism cultural impact, and the same thing with environmental impact. These are the things that needs to be measured continuously and to monitor, again, the quality of life through these constructs. You don't need to measure these things, the other things, which is the sense of material well-being. You don't need to measure social well-being and cultural well-being and so forth. You don't need even to measure life satisfaction because the model is already validated. So from a practical public policy or managerial perspective, all you need to do is measure continuously the health of and quality of life in a given community through, again, the perception of tourism impact of these different life domains: economic, social, cultural, and environmental. That's what you need to do if you buy into this model.
I would like to pass the floor to Professor Jafari, as this is our custom again for the final conclusion or final remark. We are pretty behind the time schedule. Professor Jafari, please enlighten us with your final conclusion remarks.
Well, you're giving me a task which is impossible to accomplish. The discussion has been great, and it somehow it seems to me that this is the beginning of discussion. We just opened a few ideas. We have to put them back together. But if I may go beyond this, the theme of this conference, this webinar, and go to the series that we are doing, and going to we academicians and the industry on the other hand, I want to say that the audience we had today most probably would enjoy, benefited from our discussion, because we were discussing this more academically rather than practically. Joe, you said we need the industry and academia can come together. Well, we all agree. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened, and I don't know who's going to build the bridge, but there is no bridge of communication. So we are basically, we people, again, this is not the theme of this webinar, and it's not a commentary on this webinar. It's a larger mission I'm talking about. We have to find ways of communicating our knowledge, intelligence with the industry. We don't know the language of communication for the industry. We have ended up talking to ourselves, and I can document this with my example. When Annals of Tourism Research began, it was the 3rd journal in the field. We have now over 400 journals. Who's reading this? academicians. We are talking to each other, quoting each other, etc., etc., etc. So the bridge needs to be built, but it's not built. And I think we academicians have to do something about it. You know, the industry was paralyzed is paralyzed during the COVID-19. Did we have any advice? All this research we have done, they did not come to us, and we did not go to them. And we had all this knowledge. So again, this is not this webinar, it's just a general thing, general comment I would like to make, that we have succeeded academically in tourism, but not transferring our knowledge to the fields of practice. And I really hope we give more attention to this as professors, prepare our students for the industry, for not becoming another professor. We have enough of them getting PhDs and becoming professors. So that's my Qasim, that's my comment, which is beyond the subject of this webinar. It connects to the webinar series. It connects us to academia, and it should connect academia to the industry. And I give ourselves a bad grade when it comes to connecting the academic and industry banks. They are not connected, and we are not talking to each other.
Thank you, Jafar. Actually, Scott team have summarized your idea, and our first report or annual report of Scott is coming out soon. And we are going to send it to all our participants and see how Scott did its own share of bridging theory and practice in the field. I think we did a bit of good work right after pandemic, and we can ask our audience to wait for a few more weeks until we publish the first report. Time is past. A very special thank goes to Dr. Uysal for the wonderful event and beautiful architect of this event, and all speakers that they talked the same thing in different ways, and I could trace how they beautifully are linked together. And I got some comments from some of our loyal followers that this was one of the webinars that they didn't realize how the time passed. So thank you very much again, and we hope to host you again in another webinar of Scott's. Thanks a lot, and have a good morning and good evening all. Thank you very much.
And I add my thanks to Mozo and to the panelists and to the people who stayed with us all the way to the end of the webinar. Thank you very much, you all. We together did a wonderful webinar. Thanks very much.